who's joined us today on this nice Sunday afternoon. We're about to start our session on Lessons for Humanity. How can we stay human at this time? And joining me from New Delhi, India, Mr. Kailash Satyarthi. What an honor, Mr. Satyarthi. He's an Indian social reformer who campaigns against child labor in India and advocates for the universal right to education. He has saved over 80,000 children in India from slavery in 2014. He was the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for his struggle against the suppression of children and young people, and for his work to ensure the universal right to education is respected. He is also the founder of many social activist organizations in India and of the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation. Mr. Satyarthi, welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Mr. Satyarthi, India has the largest child population of over 472 million children. And at this time, they are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the children most affected during this time are of those vulnerable families, of those daily wage earners and casual workers. How big is the risk of these vulnerable families falling deeper into poverty during this crisis?
Well, this is not only the problem or crisis in India, as we know, that the entire world is facing the same crisis, this pandemic. Perhaps for the first time in the history, so many people at one time are facing this agony and depression and uncertainty and fear and so on. And unfortunately, children are going to be most affected. Children who belong to poor families, migrant workers, indigenous people, children with some disabilities, or children of deceased parents or sick parents are going to suffer the most. And this is happening. And the biggest problem is that they may lose the entire future, the childhood, freedom, education, health, everything. And we cannot afford, the world cannot afford to turn the clock back in all respect of progress we made during so many decades, or I would say centuries. And if so many children are affected, they may fall into child slavery, child labor, they would be pushed into child marriages, they would be sold and bought. Already there were serious problems. For example, globally, almost 150 million children were working as child laborers, and half of them were working in extremely appalling conditions, what we call the worst forms of child labor. And this pandemic has exposed and exacerbated the inequalities and injustice our society and particularly our children have been facing. So it's very, very risky for children. And if we don't protect them now, then we fear to lose the entire generation.
Well, as you mentioned, this COVID-19 crisis is also becoming a child rights crisis. And we are getting, and media is also reporting on alarming cases of boys and girls being forced to join the workforce at the time. So how would you assess the current situation, how the pandemic is affecting the situation with child labor globally?
Well, we know that this crisis is not only health crisis or economic crisis. This is the crisis of civilization. This is the crisis of morality. This is the crisis of justice, and this is the crisis of childhood and their freedom. And that's why we have to address it with the child's lens or child right lens as well. So we know that 1% increase in poverty results in 0.7% in child labor. This is one thing. Similarly, we know that how the school dropouts, particularly in the developing countries, will affect the increase in child labor, child slavery, trafficking, as I said, child marriages, and so on. And another thing is that the children who are not attending the schools, but even they are studying through the online classes and so on, they are also under tremendous stress. The childhood needs some sort of, playing and jumping and meeting friends and making fun and all these kind of things. But they are now confined in their houses, and this is going to happen in a deep-rooted mental problem or psychological problem which is happening. The agony, the depression, the loneliness is caused due to this pandemic, and this is going to have the long effect. And this way, the child rights are also denied. And the child rights are also human rights. If we deny child rights, then we will fail to attain many of the goals or many of the promises we made to our children and the rest of the society. And my fear is that the SDG related to children will not be able to be accomplished if such things go on and if we don't address the issues of children now.
Dr. Satyarthi, you just started talking about children's education getting disrupted, and the UNICEF reports that this pandemic and the lockdowns have disrupted the education process for over 1 billion children worldwide. And this is an unprecedented historical event and a very unfortunate one as well. What are some of the biggest risks and lasting damage that may be caused by the fact that children's education is disrupted on such a grand scale?
Yes, it's a very, very unfortunate situation. 1 billion children are not able to attend the school today. They are not in the classrooms. But there are two major factors. One is that more than 475 million children don't have access to internet or online education system. So almost half of them are facing that discrimination or digital divide or digital discrimination. And that is going to create long-lasting gaps in the society, but also impact on the minds of those who are not able to access to education through online. So this is one. And secondly, almost 380, some say, 380 million students, primary and secondary class students, were depending on either the school feeding programs or some kind of conditional cash transfer or other economic incentives for their parents. So in case of the marginalized children and marginalized people, their families and children both are losing a big opportunity if they are not being provided midday meal or school feed benefit. Then this is also going to happen in a big disaster in their lives, because they may again fall into child labor and the situation of slavery and trafficking, prostitution. So this is another impact which we may see. And therefore, we need utmost political will with a sense of priority and compassion for our children. And that should be substantiated with adequate funding and budgetary allocations. And this is not just the case of one country, another country. This is a global crisis. And I'm hoping, and I have been, and many people have been hoping, that this common risk, the common pain and suffering will teach us a sense of shared responsibilities. So let us begin with our children. Let us begin with shared responsibilities for our children, and that is the only way.
Mr. Satyarthi, you've just mentioned the digital divide, and I think the pandemic has shown here to us in Kazakhstan the lack of investment in broadband internet or connection, also limited access to affordable technology for many families, but also the teachers, the lack of access of technologies to the teachers as well. How do you think this will change the government response and moving further? And how do you think, what measures should the government be taking at this time in regards to narrowing the digital divide?
So digital divide again needs a sense of mutual responsibility, cooperation, collaboration between the countries. Technological giants should come forward and prioritize those countries which are facing these kind of problems. And you are absolutely right that if teachers have no access to technology and internet in particular, then how they are going to teach the children? So these things are very much necessary. And that's why we have been demanding that there should be at least $1 trillion allocated for children's issue, the most marginalized children's issue. And this $1 trillion is not a big deal when the rich countries have already allocated $8 trillion for COVID relief measures, or what they call the COVID response measures, COVID aid. So $1 trillion will help in achieving sustainable development goals related to education, health, sanitation, and waters for 2 years. Similarly, this money would help in waiving off the debt payments or debt situations in case of all the low-income countries. So that is very much possible. This also will help in funding all UN and charity COVID-19 appeals. So this is possible if we prioritize that when the countries, rich countries, are spending so much money in bailing out their economies or bailing out their own financial institutions and companies, banks, and so on. If they prioritize the issues of children now, only then we can make this world a safer place and sustainable society, peaceful place. Peace cannot be achieved in piecemeals. Peace is a holistic phenomena and holistic practice. And if we have to live in peace as a human family, as a human society, then we have to learn to share these kind of resources and technology right now.
Dr. Satyarthi, at this time, many families are confined to their homes, and the homes are not always safe spaces for every family member, especially the children living in abusive households. How can we make families, how can we make homes safer for children at this time? Because we're all seeing a rise in domestic abuse reports everywhere in the world.
Yeah. So this domestic abuse with women and children is on a very serious increase. So we have to see that how we can use this time when people are spending much of their times at home, homes, they can learn to be friendly with the children. So first of all, they can listen to their children. So this child-friendly family would be free from violence and abuses, and that friendliness will begin with trust with your children. Listen to your children, because many times they don't have time or they don't have courage to share their feelings and their agony to their parents, because parents are busy doing their own things and the children are going to school and they have their own pressures in schools and so on. So this is the time when the parents can listen to them and learn from them. And this will help in educating them basic things. Because now, for example, in many countries, including in India, our friendly organization or friendly institution, India Child Protection Fund, has brought out a report in the beginning of the first lockdown in India. And that was such a revealing report that within a week, the online child sexual abuse or the use of child pornographic material has been doubled, almost doubled, 100% increase in child pornographic material demand. So that will push large number of children into various forms of agonies and miseries and exploitation and abuses in the future, because these children would be pushed eventually into prostitution or they would be trafficked. But those who are consuming that kind of stuff sitting at their homes without the parenting guidance and the parents have no time to guide them and talk to them, it would also create much more disaster in the future. So we can do it like that.
Mm-hmm. Mrs. Satyarthi, you are the founder of a movement, Laureates and Leaders for Children, that often organize Fair Share Summit. Could you please tell about the movement and the Fair Share Summit?
Well, once I got the Nobel Peace Prize, I started thinking it was a kind of big surprise for me, because I was never expecting this will happen with me. So when I saw the power, the outreach, and the respect for this prize in my own life and the lives of other Nobel laureates who became my friends, I realized that this moral power of Nobel laureates, not only from the peace but also from other disciplines, could be channelized and could be transformed to protect the entire generation of young people who need us most. They are the most marginalized children. So we thought, and finally, we took the initiative in launching the Laureates and Leaders for Children. So that is an informal group with the dozens of Nobel laureates joining hands together. And we each year or in 2 years, we organize the summits. And this year's summit was very unique. That was the Fair Share for Children Summit. But just before the summit, we had issued a joint statement on behalf of laureates and leaders. 88 Nobel laureates and world leaders signed on it. And we sent it out to every country, every head of the state, and requested them that they should spend at least 20% of their budgets, which is allocated for COVID aid or COVID response, be spent for 20% most marginalized people. But globally, we also demanded to the rich countries, because they have, as I said before, that $8 trillion have been allocated. But out of them, how can you justify that only 0.13% is allocated for the most needy and most marginalized children and their families in the world? Not even 1%, not 0.5%. Just 0.13% out of $8 trillion. So we as Nobel laureates demanded it. And then during the summit, we have come out with a report, and that has exposed all these, inequalities and injustices in the COVID response, fund distribution, and so on. And then we demanded this one, but also we demanded that all rich countries and the companies should cancel all debts of low-income countries during that time. And that could be debt swap for education and debt swap for protection of children. So that is one. We also demanded that once the vaccine is available, this should be a free public good, and every single person, whatever poor, whatever country, this should reach out to every person in the world. So that is another demand. We are also requesting the countries and the companies to ensure that there should be legal provision to ensure that no child labor is engaged in supply chain, because there is a demand for so many things and demand will increase. But so no child labor should be used in any kind of production in supply chain. And we also demanded that there should be social protection fund, a global social protection fund to mitigate this crisis, so that the children or the marginalized families who were getting some social security measures should be sustained, and that should be a global fund for that. So some of those things came out of this global summit, Summit of Laureates and Leaders for Children.
That is a fascinating work, Mr. Satyarthi. Thank you so much for doing this worldwide. The world has seen epidemics and disasters and calamities. This pandemic is different because it has is present in every country in the world, and it has affected probably every child in the world. How can we avoid lasting damage to the future of these children And how can we call for action the governments, just like you're doing? How can we, the people, the activists everywhere, can call their own governments to appropriately allocate the COVID-19 response funds and help the most vulnerable?
Well, break the silence. Just don't depend on the governments or the leaders or the companies or the rich countries and so on. Because everybody is facing the problem. And we have the right to speak, to say that, look, this is our collective problem. No problem could be solved in isolation, and particularly this one. So we have to act together, and we have to learn that sense of togetherness. And that can begin with our own lives, in our own surroundings. So I would say three things. One is that this is the time to globalize compassion. Compassion is not sympathy or empathy. This is the feeling of suffering of others as your own suffering, with a desire and drive to take action to end that suffering. So this suffering is the common suffering. So this is the right time that we should globalize compassion, but we can begin with ourselves, in our own families, in our friends and surroundings and so on. Secondly, universalize responsibility for the sustainable world and peaceful world. And thirdly, I would say, let us create a chain, a supply chain of gratitude. So this is something new in terms of terminology, supply chain of gratitude. That means when I'm sitting and talking to you, I must feel grateful to those who build this room, all the masons and, painter, laborers, electrician, plumber, everyone. I'm sitting and I just had my lunch. So I feel grateful to not only those who cooked lunch for me or served lunch today, but all those farmers, agriculture, agriculture workers, milkman, cows, animals, everyone. So I must feel grateful to human beings and the nature, and eventually God, those who believe in God. But that sense of gratitude will help in connecting. And then eventually we will create a supply chain, because our survival, our growth is because of so many other people involved in it, in those who are visible and those who are invisible. And if this sense is created at the top level among the politicians, that they are sitting there not just because of the voters, but also because of so many other people in their countries. Similarly, the big companies, the chairmen and presidents of the companies sitting in their boardrooms, they should be grateful to their customers, their workers, their managers, their employees, and so on. So let us create that supply chain of gratitude, and then we together should raise our voice that more priority should be given for the most marginalized people. They should not remain the last. And for me, the yardstick of any COVID response is very simple, that when a person who is born, especially a girl belonging to indigenous community or marginalized community in Africa or Latin America or India, in Kazakhstan or anywhere in the world, is safe, free and educated. The young girl who should not fall into trap of slavery and trafficking and prostitution, that girl should be smiling after this pandemic is over.
Mr. Satyarthi, you started your own journey as a teacher, and then you got involved in social activism and activism for children's rights. And you have often put your own life and health at danger. Your leg has been broken, your backbone, your skull has been fractured when you actually launched missions from factory to factory, exploring and researching the cases of child labor. Where did you get the courage, and where do you still get the courage and drive to continue this work?
I always think that if I was not doing this, what would I have been doing? Because I love this. This is my religion. This is my worship. And I tell you one thing, that right from the day one, when I rescued the group of children from a brick kiln and their families, I saw the first time when the children were jumping on the roads. They have never seen the roads because they were born and grew up in slavery. The tears were rolling down from the faces of those mothers, and they could not comprehend freedom, neither the children nor their parents, because they were all born and grew up in slavery. Then I could feel the glimpse of divinity, the glimpse of God, because freedom in itself, so motivating, so encouraging, so empowering, so energetic. One should experience that freedom inside. When we free ourselves from something, then the energy comes in automatically. We generate the inner power and confidence. So when we free other children and witness their freedom and be the humble, part in bringing about that freedom in their life, it is tremendous motivation. It is tremendous courage. Even if my life is sacrificed once, and we in India believe in rebirth, so if many of my lives are sacrificed to bring about that freedom, I won't mind. But I am quite confident that I am going to see the end of child slavery in my lifetime. I'm not going to stop here.
You're a voice of true hope. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do. And finally, could you please, what is your message for all the parents watching us right now?
I can talk as a father, as a big brother of so many children. And I'm not just exaggerating that the parents who are watching me, I also feel that your children are also my children. And I wanted to see them happy. I wanted to see them as children. Don't impose yourself. Don't impose your ideas. Children are born free. They are pure human beings. We give them the identities of being Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Indians and Pakistani and American and Sudanese. We have created borders. Children have never created borders. Children have never fought wars. We did. We have created all the problems. And children are just suffering. They are the most victimized human beings. So just learn from them also. If we have to learn something from somewhere, the best person is your child, because you can learn purity, you can learn forgiveness, truthfulness, honesty, and the most important thing, compassion. We can learn from our children. Instead of we give them the identity, we impose our dreams and aspirations and expectations on them. Better to enjoy their childhood. And if we have to live with joy, then we have to see the world and treat the world with children's eye. Then the world is very beautiful.
Mr. Satyarthi, thank you so much for joining us today. This was wonderful.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.